last story we're going to talk about. It's funny because I heard about this story when I was a kid, because I've always been reading this weird stuff. And as I was researching this, I realized the version I heard as a kid was heavily edited. So we're going to France. We'll hop in the Carpenter copter because I want to get out of the Ebola city of Congo. We're going to fly above, just right, like they're like running towards the helicopter. Get on. Miniguns are out of ammo. Get on. That's not you making that noise. That's the zombies behind you. You hop into the helicopter. It's so funny. I get accused of racism all the time for this podcast. This isn't helping. But anyways, they're chasing us down. Jump in the helicopter. They're forming like a human pyramid to try to get us. Take off. Just as we start to see the nuke coming towards the city. Anyways, we're going to go to France. We're going to go back in time so we don't have to worry about zombies. I don't know why the helicopter made an airplane noise, but anyways. We land. And we're now in the 1700s. We're in 1700s France. And there we're going to meet, we see a guy walking down they had roads back then. Walking down the trail. That's a safe bet. He's walking down a place where there's no grass in a straight line. And his name is Tarrare. Tarrare. Now, again, I had to talk about this during the India segment earlier. You should know by now that I can't pronounce my R's either. So if you don't know what I'm saying, he's a French guy, and his name is Tarrare. Tarrare. So anyways, Tarrare, I don't know why I picked these stories to go all in the same episode. Tarrare, it was this French guy. We look at him and we're like, that is a skinny man. That is a skinny man. He is of normal height, whatever that may be. He's 100 pounds. He looks to be 100 pounds. You're like, oh man, you need to eat something. 100 pounds for being in your 20s is quite slender. That's when he lifts up his shirt and billows of loose skin just... and like deflated balloon just kind of like slope towards the ground. And you notice that even though he's only in his 20s, his face is super wrinkly. He looks like a 100-pound man whose skin is just melted jello. Now, Tarrare was a medical freak. There's a few other people who have this condition, but Tarrare is the most notable. When he was a kid, his appetite was insatiable. He couldn't stop eating. And eventually, not literally, but he ate them out of house and home. He didn't eat the house. He wasn't like, you know what? Actually, he would have. We'll get to that in a second. He actually would have given the chance. And so his parents kicked him out because they're like, we saw you eyeing the floorboards. They kick him out because they couldn't afford to keep him. And he ends up joining like a bunch of circus freaks. And his show was, let me eat whatever you got in your pockets. Hey, you, what do you have in your pockets? And he's like, I don't know, like a couple shillings. And he's like, well, that's weird. This is France. You should have francs. And he's like, oh, yeah, that's what I meant, francs. So he'd eat the francs. And he goes, what do you have? And the person's like, I have this potted plant in my purse. And he's like, give it to me. He'd eat it. Now, his jaw didn't distend and he ate a whole pot, but he would eat cats. He'd be like, hey, cat lady, can I borrow one of those? And she's like, sure. Are you going to pet it? And he's like, pet it from the inside. He'd rip its stomach open and eat the guts, and then he would eat everything but the bones, and then he'd throw up the fur and the skin. And then at that point, everyone would kind of just applaud. At one point, he was doing this act, and he got an obstruction in his stomach, and the other circus performers had to take him to the doctor. And the doctor was, like, fixing him up, and he goes, hey, I do this act. This is a true story. He goes, I do this act where I can eat anything. And the doctor's like, really? He's like, hey, let me eat your gold watch. He couldn't stop eating stuff. And the doctor said, if you ate my watch, I'm going to cut you open and get it out. To which I imagine Tarrare, like, grabbed the collar of his shirt and went, gulp. But anyways, he couldn't stop eating stuff. Eventually, he joined the military, which, considering that life is so regimented, it seemed like a bizarre choice, but maybe just doing his civic duty. And he would eat all of his rations, and then he would do chores around the camp to eat other people's rations. And then he started eating food out of the garbage, and that's nothing compared to what's coming. Started eating food out of the garbage. And the army was like, dude, seriously. And when he'd eat, like all of his loose skin would inflate like a balloon. He could actually fill his body up with food, and then as it would dissolve, his skin would get super loose again. And finally, there was this dude at the camp, commander, and he goes, this guy's driving me nuts, but I have a plan. I'm going to make him swallow little like wooden boxes with battle plans on them. And then he'll just walk across enemy lines and no one will notice him because he just looks like a normal dude. And then he'll poop out the plans to somebody else. And so they do a test. They give him a little wooden box and put a piece of paper in it, and he swallows it. And then a couple days later, he poops it out, or a couple hours later, whatever. He poops it out, and the box was fine. And they're like, oh, this plan's going to work. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about Tarrare. This was his description. He had an abnormally wide mouth and near invisible lips. Now, I don't think that meant they were like the Invisible Woman that you could see through. I think they just meant that he had super, super thin lips. Like I said, his face was super wrinkly. His skin hung super low. His skin, like if you touched him, it was hot. He was hot to the touch. It's probably a big part of his metabolism. And he was described, this is a quote, he stunk to such a degree that he could not be endured within the distance of 20 paces. So just a super stink bag. You didn't want to be near him. And that was normal. When he ate, he smelled worse. He had constant diarrhea, and that gives a new angle to the story of them like waiting around for him to poop out the box, and then it's all just like a huge puddle, and they're like, okay, let's get a private in here to dig through this stuff, because I'm not. He had chronic diarrhea, and it was, and again, quote, fetid beyond all conception. So they should have had a poet in the room, because you hear that phrase, they should send a poet to space. They should have had a poet. Beyond all conception, beyond what great ideas lay out in the universe, they cannot use to describe the smell of his diarrhea. And I don't know how this is possible, but they said that you could look at him and vapor, like stink lines came out of his skin. You could see a visible vapor around him. There's just the stench. Now let's go back to that plan about using him as a spy. You want someone to walk across enemy lines. France was at war with Prussia at this point. You pick a guy who has big flabby cheeks, stinks from 20 meters away, has visible vapor lines coming off of him, and constantly has to stop to have diarrhea. Needless to say, the plan didn't really work. He eventually, when he went back, he's like, he didn't want to do any more army stuff, so he volunteered to go to hospital. The doctors were like, oh my god, this is amazing. We can't wait to see how this dude works. They tried curing him. One of the cures was soft-boiled eggs. Let's give him as many soft-boiled eggs as we can. And he's like, go, 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 go. Didn't work out too well. One of the things was they had a meal spread, a table spread for 15 laborers who were working in the hospital at that time. So they had all this food laid out, and they go, the doctors are like, I wonder what will happen if we give him food that is set aside for 15 able-bodied men. He ate it all. He complained about hunger all the time. If he wasn't eating, he was constantly exhausted. So it wasn't just like this circus freak, let me swallow anything. He was constantly hungry. He had to eat. That's why he was digging through the garbage. So they saw him eat all that food, and they're like, okay, enough fun, guys. Let's go back to trying to cure him. And they would put him on these regulated diets. But the problem is that he wouldn't stick to him. He would break out of the hospital or just walk out of the hospital at night. And there was a butcher shop that, they throw all their scraps in the dump and the garbage behind the butcher shop. I'm imagining it's like Lady and the Tramp. There's just a bunch of spaghetti back there. He would go through that, but so would stray dogs. So he had to fight stray dogs for food every night just to get some extra food. In this hospital, because we're in the 1700s, bloodletting was a thing. They had a bloodletting ward. You're sick. Let's take as much blood out of you as possible. That might cure you. He would drink their blood. He would go in there and he'd be like, glop, glop, glop. And you can imagine like a nurse was walking through the hospital and saw like a silhouette crouched over with like a hose in his mouth. And she's like, Tarrare, what are you doing out of your room? And he's like, gulp. And then they caught him, no joke, because imagine having a hunger that's on the level of a heroin addiction. Like you have to eat. You have to eat. They caught him in the morgue trying to eat corpses. And they're like, Tarrare. No, at that point, they were really concerned about. So the end of his hospital stay, the end of all the experiments ends like this. Tarrare's in the hospital. And he's probably sitting there and he has like an odd-shaped lump in his stomach. I don't know if that's true. But okay, let me try to stick to the fact. The fact of the story is The fact of the story is Tarrare is in the hospital. And it was a fully functional hospital. So they had like the bloodletting ward and the morgue and other stuff going on there, including a maternity ward. Oh, wait, this baby wouldn't be there because this baby was 14 months old. But they did have a maternity ward. So, not the maternity ward because this baby's too old. This baby's graduated. The baby's there for some checkup. French measles. They want to make sure the baby doesn't have French measles. So, but one day the mom's like, here, baby, 14-month-old baby, I'm going to set you down on this chair while I read this old-timey wood carving magazine. So she's like getting splinters reading this wood carving magazine. And she turns back. Baby's gone. Baby's gone. Now, I don't know if that exact sequence of events happened either. The point is that Tarrare was in a hospital and a 14-month-old baby went completely missing. They never, ever found the kid. And they didn't go, oh, Tarrare, this time. They're like, that dude ate a baby. That guy straight up ate a baby. And he took off. He ran out. That's the end of that story. I was like, there has to be another answer. It has to be that they found the baby later. But from all accounts, he ate a living baby, which isn't far from the other stuff he's done. We know he's eaten live cats and live dogs, and he's tried eating humans. So, I mean, babies kind of look like food. They look like little rolls. Now, I would never eat a baby, but they look puffy. And so Tarrare, as hungry as he is, he could just be like, it'll probably taste like dinner rolls and marshmallows. I don't know. That's super disgusting. But anyways, actually, you think they would have found the bones because he doesn't eat that. He runs out of the hospital. Eventually, though, at age 26, died very, very young. He goes and he goes to this other doctor, and he's like, oh, hi, I'm Tarrare. You might know me from the baby eating scandal, but I ate a gold fork a while ago, and I think it's still in me, and I'm super sick. Now, the doctor's looking at this saggy, fetid, gross diarrhea monster, and he's thinking, a guy who ate a gold fork, that's not the weirdest thing about you, but let's take a look. So he starts treating him and he goes, no, you may or may not have eaten a golden fork, but you have tuberculosis, advanced tuberculosis. And Tarrare's like, no, trust me, dude, I ate a gold fork. It's in my stomach. It really hurts. I've eaten tons of stuff, but for some reason that's not sitting well with me. Other than the fact that it's a 4-pronged metal object. He eventually does die though. And in his last moments, like the last couple hours of his life, 10 times the worst diarrhea. He was pooping out pus and blood-filled diarrhea. And then he dies. A fitting way to end to a man who had diarrhea his entire life. He had to one-up it. And so one of the doctors who treated him at the baby eating hospital came to this hospital because they called him up and they're like, hey, remember that baby eating scandal? And he's like, oh yeah, we have that guy here. He says he ate a gold fork. And you can imagine the doctor at the other hospital, by that time, the phone's already like hanging off the desk and he's in his jalopy to get to this hospital, or a horse, because they didn't have cars back then, but to get there, because he's like, dude, I want to find this guy because this guy was like a medical marvel. And he gets there. And the body's just laying there, and it's super stinky, and none of the doctors want to do an autopsy. And the baby eating hospital doctor says, I'll do it. I need to find out what made this guy tick. So they cut him open. His throat cavity was so huge that if you opened his mouth, you could look down into his stomach. His body cavity was filled with pus. Like his liver was covered in pus and just like an ocean of mucus in there. And his stomach, all over the inside of his stomach were and his stomach was huge, by the way, like his actual stomach cavity. But all over the inside of his stomach were these massive, gross, disgusting tumors. It wasn't in the description they were gross and disgusting, but I'm sure they were. I don't think that's a stretch of the imagination. And no golden fork. So the question is did he really eat the golden fork? Probably, for whatever reason, because he's Tarrare. But did he poop it out at some point, or was his stomach acid so intense it could actually melt metal or gold? I guess gold is a metal, but that's the story of Tarrare. Now, like I said, when I read the story when I was a kid, it was like, there's this goofy guy named Tarrare. He'd eat anything. He was a circus performer, and he ate corks and screws, and once he even ate a cat. And then you turn the page, and it's like about the two-headed wolf girl or something like that. Nothing about eating babies. Nothing about pus-filled diarrhea. None of that stuff. But I remembered that story as a kid, looking through like Ripley's Believe It or Not or some crazy person, like Crazy People in History book. They took out all the good stuff. That's why I found it for you guys on Dead Rabbit Radio. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.